The year was 1999 or 2000. I was flipping through the Starz movie channels when I came across a show called Bubblegum Crisis Tokyo 2040. This was an animated series, but it definitely wasn't a cartoon. It was something different, kind of atmospheric, and absolutely mesmerizing. Little did I know that America was at a crossroads with this particular thing, which I found out later was called anime. What was mostly an underground niche fandom in America was starting to become popular, and after years of unknowingly watching localized Japanese imports, some of which I was beginning to learn about and others I had no clue of, anime was now loudly and proudly making itself known. But it turns out anime had been around for nearly 40 years in America up till then. So what changed? How did anime and its fandom evolve over time in America that landed me in this exact moment watching this strange animation? Before we get started, I want you to tell me in the comments below the first time you discovered you were actually watching anime. Whether that series was localized or if it was explicitly anime, and what was that experience like? In the early 1960s, anime first arrived in America. This included 3 films and 8 series. All were seen as cheap alternatives to expensive domestic animation, and most notable among them was Osamu Tezuka's popular Astro Boy series. The films were actually heavily inspired by Walt Disney's classic animated features, and Tezuka's work of Astro Boy and Kimba the White Lion were no different. The films were failures though, because while staying true to Disney's formula to adapt classic folktales, the Asian folktales they were based on didn't strike a chord with Western kids. The TV series, however, found more success by eliminating the foreign factor altogether. Even more so, Japanese cartoons had no issue including elements of violence and more mature content, but this wouldn't fly by American TV standards, especially for children. So localizations of these series ensured that cartoons would be familiar for American kids and reassured parents they'd be innocent enough to watch. But the process of localization also erased any awareness about their Japanese origins, and so began a long standard of Japanese animation being heavily edited and reworked for American audiences. Any significant appreciation for anime as an actual Japanese product wouldn't come until the 1970s. Most early to mid-20th century fandoms were derived from 2 mediums, science fiction and comic books. Anime is more than often derived from their Japanese comic book or manga source material. So when the occasional Japanese work found its way into an American comic book or science fiction convention, it's easy to see how these materials might appeal to those kinds of American fans. That was certainly the case for one pioneer of the anime fandom, Fred Patton. Fred wrote many articles spanning 30 years covering anime's development as it was happening in America. He attributes 3 factors to why anime started to make noise here during the 70s. First off, giant robot anime debuted in Japan in 1972 with a series called Mazinger Z, and laid the groundwork for a trend-setting genre and many more similar series to come in the 1970s. Secondly, in 1975, the VCR alongside the VHS hit the American markets, and for those that could get a hold of the costly equipment, they began holding anime screenings for fan clubs and conventions. And thirdly, the 1960s Silver Age of comics. Comic books in the 60s had experienced a shift in tone from the previous era, the Golden Age of comic books. The Golden Age had been characterized by simplistic and childlike stories, but the Silver Age came to be known for more of its complex and dramatic content, with comics like Spider-Man and the Fantastic Four being geared towards an older demographic. American animation in the 1960s went on to ride the coattails of the Silver Age's popularity, creating a short boom of popular superhero shows in the mid to late 60s. But these series soon fell victim to stricter standards for American TV cartoons, and soon all animated series for the better part of the next decade went on to reduce or remove violence altogether, as well as any dramatic and more weighty material. This created something of a void for an older crowd who took their animated fandoms more seriously. Now, in the mid-70s, giant robot anime had arrived, and these series provided something completely uncharacteristic of standard American cartoons. Anime came with serial storylines, mature themes, stunning animation, orchestral music, and action-packed content, similar to what fans of the Silver Age of comics had come to expect from their animation. A lot of the anime fandom in the late 70s, early 80s mainly sprouted from those aforementioned fan club and convention screenings. The Los Angeles-based Cartoon Fantasy organization really led the charge on this. Thanks to the VCR, most anime was recorded at first from small local Japanese community TV stations, including series like Brave Raideen and Geta Robo G. Fans would then trade with groups from other cities to get series that only aired there. In other cases, groups would trade internationally with Japanese fans, sending their way series like Star Trek and Battlestar Galactica. Once a series got recorded on VHS, it could then be spread to other fans around the country. Star Wars' release in 1977 certainly played a part as well. Firstly, it influenced those in the anime industry to put giant robots into outer space. When American producers went searching for cartoons similar to Star Wars, they found these sorts of anime. Ninja Science Team Gatchaman, or Battle of the Planets, arrived in 1978 and became the first anime to be syndicated in America since the 1960s. The next year, Space Battleship Yamato, or Star Blazers, arrived and went on to cultivate a devoted fan base. From there, the floodgates were open for giant robots in outer space, followed soon by an array of many other popular genres. Merchandising was also a factor in anime's appeal. As this was all happening in America, manga and anime in Japan was developing into a larger commercial industry in the late 70s, and merchandising was starting to get imported into Japanese community bookstores and gift shops. In the 1980s, the fan element only grew more. You had fanzine publications, clubs for individual series, and even mini-cons like Yamato Con 1. By 1990, two large-scale conventions devoted primarily to anime was in the works, starting with Project A-Con in Dallas in 1990 and then Anime Con 91 in San Jose. Screening rooms for raw anime during the fandom's early years must have been a sight to behold. Imagine 20 to 30 people gathered in a small hotel conference room, surrounding a small TV monitor. Together they watch a show in which no one knows the language. If they're fortunate, they're given a program or a guidebook to follow along, or someone present might be able to translate live. Fan subs wouldn't truly be popularized until the 1990s, so getting the anime you wanted meant being at the mercy of the American entertainment industry to import and create a dub or actually subtitle the anime. And if they did, they definitely weren't focused on portraying it as faithfully as possible. But depending on who you ask, localization was a necessary evil. Anime had started to earn recognition as a Japanese product in the late 70s, early 80s. But even so, shows like Battle of the Planets and Star Blazers were still heavily edited to be more lighthearted than their original content would suggest. Anime was sometimes just too violent, sexually suggestive, or just plain culturally different. Even with American censorship and standards being lightened in the 1980s, anime still pushed the boundaries on what Americans would consider to be socially acceptable for television. But that certainly played a part in its appeal too. There's something about being in the know about what Japan could get away with that America couldn't. It made anime cool and exotic, and localizations of these series indirectly helped develop that sort of contrasting, possibly gatekeeper-y relationship. I wouldn't be surprised if this was ground zero for your modern day dub versus sub debates. Then there's a whole other level of localization, if you can even call it that in this instance. In 1984, the infamous production company Harmony Gold decided to import and distribute the anime Super Dimension Fortress Macross. However, to get picked up for syndication, 65 episodes were required for the series to air. Macross only had 36. To rectify this, Harmony Gold used two other anime series to patch together something that may or may not have made sense, and created the popular series Robotech. But despite this Frankenstein's monster of a series, Robotech was still one of the first anime revered for retaining its serious and dramatic plot elements from its source materials. So even here, chopping up anime to meet American standards proved kind of fruitful in the long run. Then Hayao Miyazaki and Studio Ghibli got its first taste of inexplicable American localization. In 1985, Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind dropped direct-to-video, retitled Warriors of the Wind. Not only was 20 minutes removed from this cut, including all environmental themes, but it was promoted with this poster that's more akin to an 80s American action film than a Miyazaki feature. It's no wonder this man is so historically ornery about keeping his films exactly how he made them. Truth be told, localizations live somewhere in a gray area, and sometimes it takes only getting halfway through the door to earn something a fair shot, even if that shot comes much later on. Localizations continue to open the door for anime to reach a wider audience, even if it didn't always remain faithful to what it originally was. And it wouldn't really be until the aughts, sometime after 4Kids and their jelly-filled donut, finger gun, and lollipop cigarette days, that localizations would become the exception rather than the norm. As the 80s rolled into the 1990s, it was clear that the American entertainment industry was still ambivalent to taking a chance on anime. So some fans and business opportunists sought to become distributors themselves. From 1987 to 1992, the following companies were founded with the goal to import and distribute anime theatrically, direct-to-video, or both. Streamline Pictures is often the notable highlight among these. The man behind Robotech's production, Carl Macek, ended up jumping ship on Harmony Gold soon after he was done with Robotech to found Streamline Pictures with Jerry Beck. Their specific goal was not only to bring in anime, but also to produce high-quality English dubs in lieu of subtitling to reach a broader base and make anime more appealing to the general American market. In 1989, they did right by Miyazaki with Laputa the Castle in the Sky, and then later that year, they dropped Akira. Streamline had to go above and beyond to prove themselves as a capable distributor to earn the licensing rights to Akira, even after the Japanese producers found no takers in Hollywood. But the solid English dub was enough to make the film a theatrical hit, at least by Anime in America standards. And later, Akira's video release in comic specialty shops proved an even greater success. During this time, anime was hard to get in video rental shops because stores had no discernible shelf space to place it. But now anime videos were able to gain more exposure by being sold in comic stores. By 1992, anime was considered to have hit the mainstream for one simple reason. Suncoast stores in American malls had begun stocking anime with its own designated labeled area. Being in malls, the consumerist mecca of pre-internet times, made anime, at least from a business corporation standpoint, potentially profitable. And even though its effect wasn't overnight, with this sort of exposure, it was only a matter of when. By 1998, anime was primed to explode in America, and it did so with children's programming and what I call the Holy Trinity: Sailor Moon, Dragon Ball Z, and Pokemon. But it still took a lot of work for anime to get here. Believe it or not, people have been talking about anime on the internet since 1987. That's when Panda.com was launched as an internet mailing list for discussions about Urusei Yatsura. When the internet started to enter households in the 90s, information and communication became even more accessible, and the ability to spread awareness about anime really took off. As I mentioned before, fansubbing became an essential part of anime culture at this time. While some stayed ethical in their efforts to sub anime, living by the ethos made for fans by fans, this also inevitably made way for those illegal distributors who sought out a profit. But it's also through this effort that Purple Barney and Friends tapes were discovered to be the sturdiest of VHS casings. By the mid-90s, the Sci-Fi Channel started to air anime regularly thanks to those previously listed startup distributors. Then the heavy hitters got on board. Disney acquired the rights to Studio Ghibli after they expired with Streamline in 1998. Funny enough, only 4 years prior, The Lion King was criticized for heavily lifting elements from Osamu Tezuka's Kimba the White Lion, and then when Disney started producing their own dubs of Ghibli films, they still avoided using the term anime in their promotions. Even though anime covered a wide range of genres for many different age groups, it was often the most mature aspects that were highlighted in the American media. So most opinions about anime revolved around its most violent and pornographic content. Hence why Disney probably refrained from associating with it directly. As well, anime still had its roots in science fiction and comic books at this time, creating a stereotypical association with sci-fi basement dwelling nerds. But over time, perception began to naturally change. Anime began to influence American animators, and so the style started to become more commonplace in American cartoons and series. Adult animated sitcoms were becoming part of regular programming, and this helped to ease the outlook on anime and make it more acceptable. Networks like MTV started to flirt with anime clips in their promotions, using anime's cooler aesthetic features. And of course, Cartoon Network's Toonami block connected anime with these same unique aesthetic qualities for an audience of kids, later bringing it further into the mainstream by introducing mostly uncensored anime on Adult Swim. Localizations for children had never ceased, but even so, the internet was making it easier for kids to know where they were getting their weirdly drawn cartoons from. Which brings us right back to that moment at the turn of the century, with me watching Bubblegum Crisis Tokyo 2040, finding myself fully immersed in this newly found wild and attractive medium. I didn't know at the time that anime was old news for a lot of fans, but it was the beginning of a golden era for a new generation that I was lucky enough to be a part of. The next 25 years would write a completely new history for anime and its fandom in America, where future generations would also get their taste of anime's unique cultural experience. But as they say, that's a story for another time. Don't litter, take care.